Caitlin Clark for her birthday. Let's take a look at the post that they made.
Thanks, guys. Oh, there's a cake. Oh my gosh.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Kate.
What looked like a harmless birthday clip, a cookie cake shaped like a jersey, teammates laughing, off-key singing, a room flooded with Caitlin Clark merchandise, was not a feel-good moment. It was a signal flare. It was the Indiana fever, and quietly the WNBA itself, admitting something they spent the better part of a year trying to avoid saying out loud: resistance is over. The denial phase is finished. The league has crossed from managing perception into confronting reality. Because that room wasn't just celebrating a player turning 23, it was displaying power alignment. Every logo, every jersey, every branded hoodie behind her wasn't accidental team bonding. It was an organization publicly choosing a center of gravity after months of trying to pretend gravity didn't exist. 6 months ago, this exact same imagery would have caused panic. Posts would have been delayed, comments disabled, captions sanitized, or worse, never uploaded at all. The league's official account would have treated the moment like radioactive material. And yet here it was, clean, confident, unapologetic. That's not a social media decision. That's a business decision made after numbers finally cornered everyone involved. Because for a long time, the WNBA wasn't managing Caitlin Clark, it was managing fear. Fear of internal backlash. Fear of veteran resentment. Fear of narrative collapse. Fear that acknowledging one player's impact too clearly would expose how fragile the league's previous messaging really was. So instead of leaning into growth, the league froze. It went quiet. It minimized. It diluted. It tried to distribute attention evenly in a marketplace that doesn't work that way. And the birthday silence last year wasn't coincidence, it was policy. A policy built on the false belief that star power could be controlled rather than confronted.
Overall general health. And as a man who a year ago got very, very fat and is now, slightly less, I think this would be dangerous for me. But just 2 years ago.
What changed wasn't sentiment. It wasn't maturity. It wasn't sudden enlightenment. What changed was math. You can ignore opinions. You can spin narratives. You can gaslight audiences. But you cannot negotiate revenue without acknowledging its source. The moment projections started landing on executive desks, real projections tied to broadcast deals, sponsorship escalators, ticket demand curves, the game ended. Because the numbers didn't suggest Caitlin Clark was important. They demonstrated she was structural. The difference between relevance and irrelevance. The difference between leverage and stagnation. The difference between theoretical growth and bankable growth. Games involving her weren't just outperforming league averages, they were operating in a different universe. Viewership didn't incrementally rise, it multiplied. Attendance didn't bump, it transformed markets. Merchandise didn't sell better, it rewired consumer behavior. And once that reality became undeniable, the blackout strategy collapsed. Because you cannot walk into a collective bargaining negotiation claiming unprecedented growth while pretending the engine behind that growth is optional. That's how credibility dies at the table. The league spent months trying to balance politics instead of building infrastructure, and that birthday post marks the moment balance gave way to survival. This wasn't about celebrating Caitlin Clark. It was about acknowledging dependence. And dependence is uncomfortable, especially for a league that spent decades positioning itself as a collective rather than a star-driven enterprise. But professional sports does not reward discomfort management. It rewards clarity. And clarity arrived late.
Yes, they posted a happy birthday for Caitlin Clark. I think everybody was shocked by that. I think everybody was absolutely shocked by the WNBA page posting for Caitlin Clark's birthday, because they did not last year. I'm like 99% sure they didn't last year. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they did not last year. Whereas this year, happy birthday.
The most revealing part of that room wasn't Caitlin Clark smiling in front of a cake. It was everyone behind her wearing her brand, not generic team gear. That detail matters because organizations do not accidentally concentrate branding internally unless leadership has signed off. That's messaging discipline. That's alignment. That's a franchise saying, "We're done pretending this is equal opportunity marketing." For months, the Fever tried to soften the spotlight, to spread attention, to act as if organic demand could be redistributed through intention. It didn't work. Fans don't consume that way. Markets don't operate that way. And eventually, Indiana stopped fighting the current and started riding it. That shift is what separates functional franchises from ideological ones. You don't build long-term health by suppressing your most valuable asset to preserve internal comfort. You build it by anchoring growth around what actually moves the needle and then elevating everything else from that foundation. That's not favoritism, that's strategy. And the league's hesitation to endorse that approach wasn't about fairness, it was about control. Control over narrative. Control over legacy. Control over who gets credited for success. Caitlin Clark didn't just bring attention, she disrupted authorship. Suddenly, the league's growth story couldn't be framed solely as the result of decades of incremental progress. It had a catalyst. A face. A moment. And institutions hate catalysts because catalysts expose inefficiencies that were previously hidden behind slow timelines. That's why the birthday acknowledgement matters more than any stat line or highlight reel. Because it represents the first visible crack in a wall built to contain momentum instead of harness it. 4 months. Coverage felt cautious, almost procedural. Praise was qualified. Visibility was rationed. Achievements were contextualized to the point of dilution. Even championships were framed defensively, as if celebration itself required a disclaimer. And that environment didn't come from fans, it came from within. From a league culture that conflated proportional coverage with moral compromise. From media ecosystems that confused analysis with advocacy. From players and commentators who mistook spotlight scarcity for justice. But scarcity was never the problem. Scarcity was the symptom of a league that hadn't prepared for abundance. When abundance finally arrived, it triggered insecurity instead of confidence. And insecurity always manifests as resistance. Silence. Deflection. Reframing. That's what we watched for most of the year. Not healthy debate, but institutional stalling. The birthday post is significant because it marks the moment stalling stopped working. The moment pretending neutrality became more damaging than embracing reality. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Caitlin Clark's presence didn't erase anyone else's legacy. It exposed how fragile the league's growth model was without a central star. Other leagues figured this out decades ago. The NBA didn't collapse because Jordan existed. The NFL didn't unravel because quarterbacks dominated marketing. Soccer didn't diminish its depth by celebrating Messi. Star-centric growth doesn't destroy ecosystems, it funds them. But the WNBA spent years framing itself as an exception to that rule, as if market physics could be overridden by principle alone. That illusion held as long as growth was modest. Once growth accelerated, the illusion shattered. You can't claim to be a professional sports league while rejecting the mechanisms that make professional sports sustainable. The Fever understood this faster than the league office, and that birthday room was proof. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't cautious. It was decisive. And decisiveness is what had been missing. Not talent. Not effort. Not values. Decisiveness. The willingness to say, yes, this player matters more right now, and that's okay. Because until a league can say that without flinching, it isn't ready for scale. This is why the shift feels abrupt. It's not that opinions changed overnight. It's that the cost of denial finally outweighed the cost of acknowledgement. The league didn't suddenly become comfortable celebrating Caitlin Clark, it became unable not to. And once that threshold is crossed, everything else follows. Social media tone loosens. Franchise messaging aligns. Media coverage recalibrates. Not because of goodwill, but because coherence becomes necessary. You can't sell growth while acting embarrassed by its source. You can't ask sponsors to invest while downplaying the reason consumers are watching. You can't negotiate player salaries while obscuring the economic engine making those salaries possible. The birthday post is the first public admission